Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the evolution of an absolute titan in global storytelling, National Geographic. Chances are you flipped through one of their iconic issues at some point in your life. But today, we're going to look exactly at how this brand completely transformed from a highly niche, scholarly journal into a globally recognized cultural icon.
But to really understand it, we gotta start with a distinctly modern paradox. How in the world does a magazine that boasts 280 million followers on Instagram, which by the way is the third most followed account of any non-celebrity on the entire platform, end up laying off its entire team of staff writers and pulling its legendary print magazine from US newsstands?
To wrap your head around the sheer scale of that pivot, just look at this number: 12 million. That was National Geographic's peak print subscriber count in the United States alone back in the late 1980s. I mean, they built an absolute print empire. You probably remember those massive stacks of heavy, glossy magazines featuring that incredible photojournalism sitting in living rooms and waiting rooms everywhere, every single month. But, print media has completely changed, and National Geographic has had to drastically pivot. The recent operational cuts have been pretty brutal, actually. In September 2022, 6 top editors were laid off. Then, in June 2023, the brand let go of all its remaining staff writers, shifting to a 100% freelance-based writing model. And beginning in 2024, those iconic yellow-bordered issues ceased to be available for purchase on US newsstands altogether. So today, we're going to dive into the 130-year history that led up to this dramatic digital pivot.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with the origins of the yellow border. Check out their pioneering visual storytelling, look at the historic expeditions they've funded, navigate some of the controversies they've faced, and finally, look at how they're adapting to the digital age. All right, let's step back in time. Section 1. Origins of the Yellow Border. From a scholarly journal to a global icon. The contrast between their starting line and where they are today is literally staggering. We're heading back to September 22nd, 1888. The very first issue was published just 8 months after the National Geographic Society was founded. Its first president, Gardner Green Hubbard, introduced it as a scholarly journal meant for just 165 charter members, all under a nonprofit society. Fast forward to the modern era, and it's a Disney-owned media property with a fully digital focus and a freelance writing model. Just an incredible evolution.
And here's a wild fact. Their defining trademark, that iconic yellow border, wasn't even there at the very beginning. This distinctive rectangular cover border didn't show up until February 1910, and originally it actually featured an oak leaf perimeter. They eventually dropped those leaves in 1979 just to make the clean yellow rectangle more visibly pop. And man, did it work. That yellow border literally became a window to the world for millions of readers.
But look, a window isn't much good without something amazing to look at, right? Section 2. Pioneering visual storytelling and redefining the magazine experience.
Believe it or not, early on, visual storytelling was actually a bit controversial for them. Some board members heavily criticized using too many illustrations, calling it unscientific. But editor Gilbert H. Grosvenor fought hard for what he called dynamical pictures. And that fight paid off with some incredible firsts. We're talking full-page pictures of Tibet in 1905, their first stunning color photograph of a flower garden in Ghent, Belgium in 1914, and eventually slapping a photograph directly on the cover in July 1959. That one featured the brand new 49-star U.S. flag after Alaska gained statehood. But it absolutely wasn't just photography. We have to talk about cartography. Editor Gilbert H. Grosvenor famously said, "A map is the greatest of all epic poems. Its lines and colors show the realization of great dreams." Their mapping division, which started up in 1915, was hugely influential. Get this, their map archives were so incredibly accurate that President Franklin D. Roosevelt actually filled his White House map room with them. And Allied leaders like Winston Churchill literally used National Geographic maps at the Yalta Conference to divide up post-war Europe.
So they weren't just documenting the world from the sidelines, they were actively making it happen. Section 3. Expeditions and milestones. Funding world-changing exploration.
This is a crucial point. National Geographic was physically bankrolling journeys into the complete unknown. Because of their backing, the world got to see Robert Peary claim the discovery of the North Pole in 1909. Readers got absolute front-row seats to Jane Goodall's groundbreaking chimpanzee research in Tanzania starting in 1961. And in 1985, they brought the haunting, first-ever images of the RMS Titanic right into people's living rooms after Robert Ballard's expedition finally found it resting at the bottom of the Atlantic. And I definitely didn't stop at the edges of the continents. We're talking to infinity and the deep.
Way back in 1952, they started publishing the undersea explorations of pioneer Jacques Cousteau. In 1969, Apollo 11 astronauts transported the National Geographic Society's flag all the way to the surface of the Moon. And decades later, in 2012, they were part of a joint scientific expedition that saw filmmaker James Cameron become the very first person to dive solo to the deepest part of the ocean, the Mariana Trench.
Now, obviously, a 130-year legacy is going to have some bumps in the road. Section 4, Navigating Controversies and the Historical Stumbles of an Icon.
For a brand built entirely on absolute truth in science and photography, they've definitely had moments where that credibility was heavily tested. Back in 1982, the pyramids of Giza were digitally altered just to fit better on the cover. That was basically the very first major scandal of the digital photography age. In 1988, the authenticity of an Ice Age ivory bust they featured was called into question. In 1999, the magazine got wrapped up in the Archaeoraptor scandal, where a fossil that supposedly linked birds to dinosaurs turned out to be a complete forgery. And honestly, sometimes the scandals were just outright absurd, like in 2010 when a winner of their Your Shot competition was exposed for using photo editing software to fake an image of a dog surrounded by fighter jets.
Beyond the scientific stumbles, there were also deeply serious cultural reckonings to face. In March 2018, then editor-in-chief Susan Goldberg issued this incredibly stark acknowledgement, stating, "For decades, our coverage was racist. To rise above our past, we must acknowledge it." The publication openly stated that historically, it had largely ignored non-white Americans and frequently showed different international groups as exotic, which promoted racial cliches. They decided to tackle this legacy head-on in order to move forward.
So, how does a legacy print titan survive the modern era? Section 5, Adapting to the Digital Age, a new era of ownership.
For well over a century, the magazine was totally owned and managed by the nonprofit National Geographic Society. But then, in September 2015, the whole landscape shifted. The society traded a controlling 73% interest to 21st Century Fox for $725 million. This was a massive structural change for them. And then, just a few years later in 2019, Disney acquired 21st Century Fox, which brought National Geographic's media properties officially under the Disney Publishing Worldwide umbrella.
It's just the harsh reality of today's media landscape. The delivery method has changed. You might not be grabbing it at the grocery store checkout aisle anymore, but the visual focus absolutely remains. While physical copies are now strictly limited to subscribers, their digital presence is just staggering. Those 280 million Instagram followers represent a daily, instant reach right in our pockets that honestly Gilbert H. Grosvenor could only have dreamed of back in 1888.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As that iconic yellow border officially moves away from the tactile, heavy paper of our local newsstands and firmly onto the glowing glass of our smartphones, what does the future of exploration actually look like? The world hasn't stopped being fascinating, and National Geographic certainly hasn't stopped showing it to us. We're just looking through a very different window now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.